Hello, today we are inaugurating the next exhibition. It's called La Peña del Júcaro, and it is an homage to, well, the name comes out of the Peña del Júcaro done by Rafael Almanza for more than 27 years, and it is actually a space to think and to show the work of the independent print houses in Cuba. I think we're going to start with, with a message by Rafael Almanza, who did not receive the visa from the German embassy in Cuba to come and be with us today and be homaged today.
I am making a small recording. I am treated as a criminal, and this is a universal status because not only the Cuban government, but also German democracy regards me as such. For 25 years, we have organized Peña del Júcaro, and it's a subversive activity. Art is subversive, and so is Christianity. There will never be an agreement between Christ and the world. That is clear. But I want to say that Peña del Júcaro has been the biggest celebration for me. We have always felt happy. And it was famous for that. During the hard times, we were celebrating Martí and the other Cuban prophets, and this uplifted us. Our activity throughout these years, starting in 1995, I felt it was too much that we were doing nothing to celebrate Martí's death. All of the existing celebrations were official. So a group of 3 people, the musician Cepero, Miguel Aguirre, and myself, we ended up making an intervention at the La Merced convent. We were there for a few years until the church authorities came into conflict with our project. So at that point we left. And we continued to do the project with the same passion. We said to ourselves, we must be happy. We cannot allow ourselves to be crushed. As you see, I'm not doing very well right now. It's very warm in Havana, and for this and other reasons, my body is not doing so good, but I'm happy. Undoubtedly, our space is an act of defiance, and it's creative because there is no other future for Cuba. What is happening now here means that Cuba is doing something. It's very important when people rise up and they mean that it will never again be possible for an individual to take control over public opinion. The fact that I wasn't able to be there saddens me a lot, especially because you would think that a democratic country would proceed otherwise than a communist country, but they're actually the same kind of animal. Martí's democracy is a democracy that holds fast to certain rules, and we need to think about them. When we started doing La Peña, I first thought I would write a book about Martí's thought. But then I thought it would be better to talk with people, tell them about Martí, than to write an academic book that might end up on Amazon but nobody buys or reads. Maybe that stage is now concluding. The stage for which dialogue with the people was essential. I'll say Martí's democracy, Cuban democracy does not follow Martí's democracy. That should be clear. In addition to La Peña, we have a publishing house. It's a publishing project we created sometime later. We publish my own work, but also the work of other authors. We've published 17 books to make people be aware of our existence. We are people who do not have the skill to advertise ourselves. Therefore, since some of our publications are available where you are, I would ask you to have a look at them. And hopefully, at some point, we will be able to celebrate the Júcaro and pay homage to Martí. And I had hoped to make it also an homage to boys. I was going to place a stone by the Júcaro when we planted it there. Hopefully, maybe you can find a Júcaro tree and plant it. It's called a black olive there. And I would ask you, if you can find one and plant it, to place a stone below in homage to Joseph Beuys. God bless you and thank you very much.
Well, it's very emotional and very sad that he cannot be here today because he's a wonderful speaker, a very inspirational artist and maestro, no? He's a professor for generations. So we opened this morning the exhibition, the actual space. But I want to, and we invited you, Joaquín Badajoz, to be kind of one of the operarios, one of the people who will work with us because your experience on independent publications in Cuba and independent literature in Cuba. So the first question I have is, why is it relevant that we name this space Peña del Júcaro?
Well, thank you, Tania, and thank you, INSTAR and Documenta, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and also, talk to you that are present here. Well, we chose the Peña del Júcaro Martiano to name the space that is just around the corner that you can visit when we finish here and will be open for 10 days. Because as you see in this video, this guy, Rafael Almanza, is a very important intellectual living in the province in Cuba. And he has been a very brilliant, independent mind. And he found this Peña. Peña is like a gathering of persons. It's like, that's a Cubanism to call, let's say, like a club or a group of people, that gathering We call that in Cuba Peña. So he created that peña in homage to Jose Marti, that is the apostle of the Cuban independence. He was a poet and politician of the 19th century. And he created that 27 years ago. We also have this species of scrapbooks or album with all the history of the Peña del Júcaro Martiano. And around this peña, he centralized a lot of young artists and intellectuals, ecologists, people of several, people that are really working to change or contribute to the country in a very independent way. So that's the main thing, but what we call the Peña del Júcaro Martiano. In homage to Rafael, who will, we had the idea that Rafael would be here and make that kind of homage in person, but the German embassy in Cuba denied the visa to travel here. They under the presumption that he could be a deserter or abandon the country. So it's really sad. We all know, especially here in Germany, that a bureaucrat doing his job could be really, really bad. So maybe he's doing just a good job, but that way to attach to what he want to do do that kind of experience could be really damaging for many people. So that's what happened in that case.
I think you told me when we knew the news that they didn't know how patriot Almanza was, and also it was the first time ever he was going to leave the country. He has never left the country. So yeah, but so I have to say that many years later, when we started INSTAR, some of the people who were in Peña del Júcaro and were kind of it's kind of a school, no, that he has created with all the people who go there, came to INSTAR, and you could see and you could identify who was in Peña del Júcaro because the ethical behavior and the knowledge and love for history of Cuba and history in general. So yeah, I wanted you to talk to us about what other projects exist in Cuba doing something similar, and also if you can talk about the difference between Havana, which is the center, the cultural center where all the resources are gathering, and places like Camagüey, which is where Almanza is, Pinar del Río, Santiago de Cuba, Holguín, and other provinces. How is the condition, the provinces versus Havana, and is there any other projects?
Yeah. Well, it's really good that you highlight the ethical, influence of this group of people, because if you remember at the beginning of his message, he talked about the art and the Christianity as a very subversive way to approach life. And I think poetry is also another way of subversion, and art is, overall it's subversion. And but also the Christian ethic and the patriotic, ideal that he is actually nurturing these young generations. He has been, considered like a professor generation, several young generation for decades. So here we are in the program that we were going to have during 10 days. We are having conversation with different independent editorials in Cuba and outside Cuba. Now we have a very large diaspora. Cuba is a very diasporic country, as you probably know. So there are more than 3 million people outside the country. And the same thing that happened in the island, these people have been translating that kind of framework to the exile. Living here in Germany or any country in Europe or the United States, that is where the most of these exiles are based. And we will have conversations with different independent publishing house during the week, and we will have some other conversation with journalists, independent journalists, and people that are creating content in different ways. And yeah, that's basically the program for 10 days. And also it's very relevant that as you say, in Havana, that is the capital, the artists in Havana and intellectual and the writers, they are more probably focused in the idea that they can become or make it at some point and become mainstream. So they can publish in the government editorial house and stuff like that. But in the province, like in every country, the situation changed a little bit. So that's the reason that most of the independent publishing houses are actually are created from people that are from other provinces, from the countryside. And you have a lot of people, you will, have conversation with those people, and they are very representative of what is, happening in this ecosystem of publishing houses in the Cuban, inside and outside Cuba.
You were talking about independent journalism as well as independent publishing houses inside and outside Cuba. How do you think all of the written material that is being generated in the last 10, 15 years in Cuba are helping create a new vision of the country, and how is this adding to this history that is being in construction or forgotten or suppressed? How do you see that happening?
Well, I think that the dynamic in the creation of content and how this generation that is basically they ideologize a lot because they have been growing up and interchanging ideas in another different context, totally different than how the context was before the Berlin Wall fall 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. These people have been actually under different political circumstances. And the debate of ideas and the interchange of ideas is really more probably free and independent in that sense. I think that's the way, for example, the work of INSTAR, and how independent publications are impacting the consumer, the readers inside the island, is helping to shape I want to think that it's a more inclusive country in the future, that is inclusive for different ideas, different political parties, different way to approach reality, and that's I think the impact is a very powerful and is positive at the end.
We have just a little announcement. We have 3 magazines, independent magazines, who have done a special issue for Documenta, and they're going to be released during these 10 days. So I hope that they brought many copies. So it's in English and Spanish. So there's the difference. We make them in English for the first time. And I feel sometimes that this is kind of what is missing in Cuba. Yeah. Our literature and cultural written production is the fact that we almost talk to each other in an endogamic way. Like we hear the story about this filmmaker that was censored, and we read the story about this young person who was imprisoned by the government, but everything stays in Spanish. And unfortunately, that is part of what is happening with the culture in Cuba, that people outside and people inside have a big gap, because the people outside are missing a lot of stories that we are consuming every day through these media, independent media. So hopefully by the translation of these 3 magazines that we can break that bridge a little bit.
Also, if you have seen, if you have visited the program that we already closing today, that is a program of cinema, movies, we will see, you can see the amount of production in that term. So Cuba is let's say, a mid-sized or small country, underdeveloped country that have been living in a very special circumstances for the last 70 years. Different dictatorship and autocratism and that kind of stuff. But the production of culture is a very cultural and dynamic country. There are a lot of poets and writers and people, rethinking that reality and expressing themselves even in the very, very touching ways. So I hope that, yeah, the less we, the more we translate those authors, or you participate here in the events and know them, it will be really, really, very good for them. Yeah.
We actually have one writer who lived in Germany for a long time. So he's the only one we could invite that has a book in German. He has a novel that he wrote, I think in Spanish, and it's translated to German. So we hope to do the presentation of that here so you can read it. Yeah. But I think it is true that we see this with the cinema, we see this with the list of censorship, artists who have been censored. We see this with the amazing list of writers. It feels like the movement of independent art in Cuba, which is almost 25 years old at this point, so it's not young anymore, has so many artists who are part of it. That is a big force, and it's actually in a way not a competition, but it's a kind of option for cultural consumption.
Actually, I think that the main production of literature and art in Cuba right now is independent. We can say that is the independent, culture and the independent movement, who they are, feeding the culture of this country inside and outside the island. There are more production in independent editorials and artists doing their independent work, filmmakers or poets or writers or artists in general that are working than actually official culture. That's the state of the culture in the country now.
No, and of course censorship has touched every area of culture in Cuba, but literature is one of the one they really concentrated in, because they really are I don't know why they are so afraid of the written word, but they really, it's very, very hard to publish officially in Cuba. Something is a little critical, so very spontaneously people start creating this kind of, at the beginning they were almost like handmade, like books. At some point they also had, when the internet, we didn't have internet at the beginning, we had intranet, meaning that the government put ¿cómo se llama? Correos, emails to people, but you could not go to the internet. You only could communicate through emails. Like if Cuba was a big corporation, no, with its own email account. And it was very interesting how at the beginning of the, mid-90s, end of 90s, and beginning of 2000, people started to send their books by email to others. And something that is quite,
and also even they had, in this situation, just very close situation, they had polemics and they debate stuff. And actually they had something that is known now like as the war of email, because people start having some kind of discussion about the past, about the ideology or the country. So it's really, really interesting, that process in Cuba.
In a way, it was a very natural way, because at the beginning people sent their work, the poems, their novels, the short stories through email to the friends, and everybody sent it to other friends. Then people start doing magazines for emails. So they were doing magazines, but they were really emails, like page 1 is the opening, page 2 is the, so they were sending that through email. Then they started to manufacture all of these magazine and photocopy, but it's also very difficult because all of the equipment are the state owned, so it's very hard. And then what happened is slowly you start seeing the more institutionalization of the practice by this actual magazine, online magazine, having websites where you can go and see issue 1, issue 2, so it's kind of more organized. Also, the other thing that happened was the blogs. I think the natural development was after people start sending things online, then the blog started, and it became really big because in Cuba, a lot of people were blogging. And then that was kind of a way people were narrating their everyday life, or the life in Cuba that was kind of different than the official version. And then you see these online magazines. Now we are at the moment where all of these online magazines and editorial houses are starting printing. You know, we have in the space, we have a lot of books that have been actually printed by different houses, independent printing house. So, and they are amazing quality. So it's really, really good. And it's a way for people to try to sell it as well, or to circulate it in a more professional way.
Yeah. And e-content have been, I mean, e-content, all the electronic content, blogs and all these, probably they help Cuban to be read or hear outside the country. Because some people, they weren't able to polish that from the island, so they say the content to some friends outside, and that people post the content in that blog. And many people probably remember, if you follow some Cuban politics or stuff like that, Giovanni Sanchez blog, Claudia Cadelo, but Giovanni was a huge, momentum in that sense in the 2000s, and then now it became a newspaper inside the island that she produced inside the island. But for many years, she was sending a digital newspaper, a digital newspaper that is called 14 medio, 14 and a half, .com. But it's really interesting because for many years she was just publishing that outside, sending the content and people publishing that outside. Now she's doing that from inside Cuba. But now they have more access. For many years, they were, just a way to expose themselves to international readers, reading and understanding the Cuban story, told in first person. Because for many years also, the story that the international audience was listening or reading were not actually, it was very official. It wasn't the actually story of people producing and doing, their stuff inside the island. And it was also very, a very funny fact is that they used the digital pen drives to change stuff. So, I mean, they didn't have access to internet, but they used to put all the content inside the pen drives and distribute that. And even some people charge for that kind of pen drives. That's the way that they share their movies or magazines, all the content that some people download from the internet, newspapers, everything. So they consume everything digital, but with a delay in that sense, probably kind of evergreen content, because it was like let's say 3 gigabytes of content. So they gave that in there. You can read novels, whatever content you want to put there. So it's very, very curious that.
And it's funny because among all the magazines, independent magazines, there are also some fashion magazines that we have now for making people like iconic or whatever. But I want to go back with the idea of what happens in the countryside, and another person that we are kind of homaging here in this exhibition is Pedro Pablo Oliva. Do you want to talk about it since you've been close to him?
Pedro Pablo Oliva is a Cuban painter. He's 70-something, and he had been for many years. He had been doing for many years something that is very unique in Cuba. He created in the 90s a center that is called Casa Taller, like an atelier, Pedro Pablo Oliva. But this center was very focused in the community. He built a huge library, and he was letting people to consult the books, and sometimes making some copies of the books or some pages or articles from art magazines or stuff like that. But I think the most important thing, he's a very well-known artist, and he's actually National Prize of Art. But one of the very unique things is that this guy have been like a philanthropist, a sponsor of many, projects, independent projects, and from publishing books or stuff like that to even helping researchers or helping young artists to develop. And creating some kind of subventions to help them develop. So for me, it's very particular because most artists in Cuba don't do that. Even when they achieve some kind of success as an artist and material success, financial success, they don't put their money, you know, to recycle in that way inside the society, helping others that are, you know, less fortunate to, you know, help them that, you know, with that kind of boost that some people sometimes need for producing a product, even, you know, buy some oils or material to paint or stuff like that. So for many years, it was really, really important. And at some point, the government, you know, didn't allow him to do that anymore. But have been like a symbol also, how you can help your neighbor in that sense. And philanthropy was basically also put out of the country in 1959. Most of philanthropists, they abandoned the country at that point. And then everything became very sterilized culture, so they don't let people, you know, have that kind of role of, you know, like a sponsorship or private sponsorship basically disappeared of the Cuban society for many, many years. So the work of this guy was a very singular, unique, and stubborn, basically, because you are doing something that the society don't see well. It was basically a role for the state institution and stuff like that.
And yesterday we were talking with one of the independent filmmakers that was shown in the Space One, Cabinet One, and he was from the Pinar del Rio, which is the province of this artist. And he was telling us that the first time he had a camera in his hand was because he was going to the house of this artist, and they gave him a camera to film, just, you know, to try to play with it. And now this person is one of the prizes of the Rotterdam Film Festival, you know. So I think it's interesting where all this can go, and all these planned and regulated way of stimulated art, you know, that in Cuba sometimes is cut because the government sees everywhere a danger of, you know, where these people going, why they have this independence to do the work. Yeah. So do you have any questions for us?
Thank you. In the beginning, I think I didn't catch it really. He said something about Christianity, and I didn't catch it really, and second, what's the position between arts and Christianity? I was a little bit astonished to hear that.
Yeah, well, we also have here invite at some point, but he wasn't allowed to come here. The founder of a center in Pinar del Rio that was called Center of Civic and Religious Formation. That center had a magazine back then in the 90s that was called Vitral. And around Vitral was like a huge gathering of artists and writers and independent people producing and creating content for that magazine. But also, they were in work, very related in work with the Catholic Commission for the Culture. Everything of this institution are independent. They are under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, but yeah, to exist. But they are independent in the sense that the state allowed them to leave because they are they want to keep some kind of good relation with the church. That is, you know, all the independent that the church under this situation can be. But at the same time, they have some kind of borders and limits. They, you know, you are not all independent that you want until that point. But during the 90s, the Bishop of Pinar del Rio led them to be really, really independent in that sense. So there is a good relation between, because for several years, the church helped them, independent artists, to publish in the independent magazines that were published by the church, or also help them printing stuff for their exhibitions, like catalogs and stuff like that, using the resources of the church to prepare or to help them, you know, do their artwork. But Cuba also is a very atheist state. So for many years, I mean, there is a relation. This guy is a Christian and, you know, Catholic intellectual, and he have gathered Christian and Catholic intellectual, but that is not what is happening in the whole country. There are many atheistic or people that practice some Afro-Cuban religions. That is another story. In that case, his case, but it's not the totality of the intellectuals. Most intellectuals, I could say that they are like probably they have some kind of spiritual relation or some kind of you know, believing, but not that they are religious or they are related to Catholic. Also, the Cuban country is, you know, the foundation of the country is Catholic, because, you know, we were you know, a colony of Spain, and was basically, you know, a Catholic country. But we are Catholic in a very loose way, to say something.
No, it is true. I'll give you a minute. It is true that some of the projects use the Catholic Church as a protection, especially in the 90s, because now it's a little easier to be independent. It has a punishment still, and you are persecuted, but the church really helped some of this group. Not all of them, but some of them. One second.
Thank you so much for this interesting talk. I would like to know more about the art education in Cuba. I've talked to an artist from Berlin, from Cuba, and he told me about an art academy in Havana, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more. Do artists, as you say, a lot of them go to other countries, but how do the artists live in Cuba?
Art formation.
Educación.
Educación artística en Cuba. ¿Cómo es la educación artística en Cuba? Well, I think the art education in Cuba has suffered lately a big blow from the government. I remember when I study primary, let's say from 15 to 17, 18, I study Escuela Elemental de Arte, so they really form you. Then you go to middle level, like high school, then you go to university. Now, this is not the same way. That school that was so important, I think it's the most important school I was when I was 15. Now, people have to pay for it, and it's just workshops that people pay. The rest of the schools are still state-run, but then you have the problem of if you say something they don't like, you get thrown away by the school. We have many cases of friends who have been taken out of the school, like expelled from the school because the work they do. And sometimes they're not even critique, they're just questions, existential questions they ask, or some questions. So yes, we have a school. Personally, I think the Instituto Superior de Arte, I was a professor there many years ago. They expelled me from the school as a professor, but I think that unfortunately the state is so interested in using art as a means for money that you see situations like, for example, big buses full of American collectors going to the art school, to the studio of students that are beginning their work. I mean, they're not even formed yet to sell and to yes. I mean, now the last Havana Biennial, they didn't have, I mean, lately they don't have that many tourists, but this is a practice that I was against, because it's okay that the people can have some money, of course, for their work, But if you are in a school forming and what they teach you is not to express yourself, but using the art only as a commodity, this is problematic, especially if you are not that kind of artist. Then what does it mean? That you're a bad artist? You know, so it creates this kind of too early for me situation. Saying that, I can say that Cuba has great art schools, you know, and maybe sometimes they are good because the students are doing opposite of what they are told to do, but it's a good environment to produce. The problem is after you graduate. Like, they have all this at school, but what do you do after you graduate? You know, they don't let you show, you become independent, and then you start being persecuted or censored, and then it always ends and you leave in the country, basically. So I always say that Cuba has a top, you know, a ceiling that is quite low. It's different for everybody, but it's quite low for everybody, in which you start bouncing and hurting yourself. And then at some point you have to, yeah.
And the reality is that they are really good in the sense that you start from the elementary school until you graduate to the superior school of art. So in that sense, the academic, you know, formation of the students is really solid. But then you get inside a system that is totally twisted. So that's the reason the Cuban art, you can see really great artists, but then they don't have a market. You don't know how, you know, the value of their artwork, because, I mean, they have been controlled by the state. Some artists work with, you know, independent galleries, international galleries, but they are just a few, and it's really hard to have, you know, except people that abandoned the country in the 80s, that if we already have some kind of track of the value of their artwork and stuff like that, it's really hard for you know, that really good artist, very well formed with a, I mean, at the beginning, I know that in the last years, even that kind of school, that kind of system that I think is really good, have suffered under, you know, the circumstances now, because they don't have the same resources. Or they do, yeah. You know, even in the most, you know, chaotic and Orwellian situation, people continue writing and, you know, writing poetry and, you know, falling in love and stuff like that. So.
But actually, one thing that I really liked at the time I was studying is that in my classroom, I had a person that was the son of a bus driver. Another person was working in a factory, so they didn't have to come from elite or anything like that. Now, the new generation, you see a little more the kids of the painters being in the school and having more advantage. So I think that's kind of disturbing a little bit, because it's changing the landscape in which, I mean, that you still can be anyone and go and study, but more and more we see, oh, this person is the nephew or the son of, so that's kind of scary. Yeah. But the other thing is, the problem is not the school for me. The school is fine, even if they are not good sometimes, or even if you have to study on your own sometimes. The problem is what happened after. Then as soon as you leave, you have the Decree 349 that completely control what you can do. You have the Decree 370, which completely can control what you post online and what you do online. So that's for me the problem, not the education.
And also the academic staff have been suffering, because, I mean, many great artists have abandoned the country for the last 40 years. So in that sense, you have a lot of young people teaching younger, you know, artists in all the schools, all the universities. If you go to the School of Humanities, you will see really young, you know, scholars working there. When, you know, 50 years ago, there were all the people senior, all the staff was senior. Now they are really young people. And once they get some kind of success or they have that kind of shock with reality, they abandon the country. So the fugue of, you know, brains in Cuba is so high that, of course, you know, they are reinventing themselves every day. They are trying to do things because, you know, they need to live. They need to believe in something. They need to dream. But it's really tough in many senses, because there are a lot of brilliant people abandoning the country. They don't have the brilliant, artists teaching them. Or when they have brilliant artists like Tania, when, have been teaching or funding the INSTAR in Cuba, they make their life impossible. They are the whole time attacking them, trying to push them outside of the country. So if you do that with your most brilliant minds, what can we expect, you can do with people that are vulnerable or more fragile?
And I think this is why we find in Cuba so much this kind of alternative education, like it happens in La Peña del Júcaro, happens with the studio, the atelier. I'm sorry? They call it in Argentina las clinics. No, but I think here is more spontaneous, is less regulated, so it's more like you live in Camagüey and your school is not good, or you don't find the kind of things you want there, and then you go to Almanza's house.
Yeah.
And then you spend their evenings discussing about history and books he suggests you to read, and he give you.
Yeah.
Come back, talk to me about what you read, what do you think about it. So it's almost as in Cuba lately, the informal artistic education has been more powerful than the institutional artistic education.
Yeah,
and this is what we're bringing here, some cases, not all of them, but some examples.
Yeah, more like mentors, informal or irregular mentors that they can, but even those people, there are not many, because that guy that they didn't allow him to travel here, he believed he's a patriot. He believed that he need to give, back something to the community and help to form new generations. There are not many people like this. People are trying to survive. And when you're trying to survive, there are many, many things, in that kind of situation that you cannot deal with that. If you have the chance to, live out of the country, you go. You don't think, well, maybe I should stay here and help, to develop this community, because there have been many years people trying to do that, and the response of the government is really bad. So actually, this guy is very, his health is not really good. I say at the end of the video, and they don't polish him. Nobody help him to do anything. They are the whole time trying to, put in some limits on what he do, or visiting him to try to, create situations. So it's hard.
I also think that the reason why we brought here independent publishing houses, independent magazines, and independent alternative art education projects is because the actual importance it has in Cuba. Like 30 years ago, you were a poet, you were even Reinaldo Arenas, who now is very well known. You could not publish anywhere because you have only one option, which is the state publishing house. And if they didn't want to publish you, you were dead. You didn't exist. So I think this is, so I feel it's really beautiful and hopeful, the fact that now, if you're a young writer or a non-liked by the regime writer, you have an option. And people can actually see what you read, what you write, and have an opinion. And because of that, we have been able to, let's say, rescue older writers, because some of these publishing houses are trying to rescue older writers that were lost. And we can see,
thanks to this kind of, small, independent publishing house, the work of invisibilizing people is harder. The government and the state institution cannot, just erase people, because they are publishing through some kind of, irregular ways or irregular channels. So I think that's very, very important. And it's not just a lecture for Cubans. I think all, the countries can learn from that. You cannot rely in institutions and government-run institutions. People need to do their things. Art is not, it's not a mandate. You do what you have to do, and the moment you need to do that, and you need to find the channels. You cannot rely on the channels that they are already there. You need to create new channels. That is actually one of the great challenges of art, an artist. You need to create your own channels. If they are not exist, you are going to invent some of them, and that's important.
And I think over the years, the Cuban state and the Cuban Ministry of Culture and its institution have become more and more moralistic, let's say. And sometimes you have in art to give some freedom for people to say the wrong thing, to say things that might be offensive or people don't get it, and then bring this, because it's part of what is happening in Cuba. And one example of that is that the Minister of Culture and Raúl Castro precisely are against reggaeton and rap and all of these things, and they think is completely vulgar, and of course, yeah, there are texts that are not respectful of women and all of this, we understand, but you cannot go against what is popular culture and then eliminate it just because a mandate, you know. So I think this is also there are many independent recording houses, which we're going to bring later in August, some of them. But I think it's important to, I mean, the fact that the more the government has become moralistic and old, to be honest, very old in terms of their taste and aesthetic taste and taste for art, because they are so nervous of they need something they can control, so it becomes more mediocre. I think it's at the same time more and more independent houses are.
Yeah, and it's the same. I mean, the same. The modern countries have been fighting against the union of the church and the state. The church needs to exist because we believe, and we have, we need that kind of relation with all the people that believe in the same thing we believe. But the union between the church and the state, it produced a very twisted society, and we know that for sure. The same happened with the party become in a union with the state, the ones that are regulating and dictating everything. Because then is the moral of the party. The same, you know, in all the time was the moral of the church. Now is the moral of the party, the Communist Party in that case. And also, I mean, that the impact they have over the society when that kind of union exists is very tough, and it's devastating, because they are, when, you know, in normal societies, we all have different, you know, normal rules, and we create some kind of a contract, social contract, that help us to live in a kind of flexible, you know, in between flexible borders. But when something comes from, you know, like a mandate, those borders doesn't exist. So that the impact on art and creation, now we are seeing something. You say that, like, you know, if something is not politically correct, immediately the society start pushing against that, and some people try to clear stuff and some kind of cleaning, you know, that cleaning labor. But now I think the same happened in an autocratic country, that everything is a mandate, and the impact that have in the behavior and the production of, you know, artistic product is really, really, you know, tough.
I think the original idea of having the new man that the revolution wanted to create, that was so hopeful and so beautiful and so ethical and so majestic, it has become like a very mediocre robot now. So I think people don't catch it. Any other questions?
Hello, is it on? Oh yeah. Thank you very much. I wanted to kind of go back again to the question about education, but specifically about poetry, right? Because it does have that revolution. A lot of the revolution is in Latin America, in the Caribbean, or also poets. So I was wondering, you know, what was kind of the history of pedagogy around poetry, and then how the production and then the like regulation of poetry in the capital, like Havana, versus the countryside, how that compared in terms of poetry production and regulation.
But how compared in terms of quality of the production, or the amount of? Yeah.
The countryside and the capital.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's different in a sense. I think probably the people that live in the capital, they are more exposed to new, books, the launching of new books or new ideas. The more, the trends, the actual trends. That trends probably when you live in a province. There are some kind of delay in a way you can some kind of stuff like that. But in terms of formation, I think there are not many differences because I think probably the same writers in that sense constitute the Cuban canon, literary canon. So we all have access to that kind of thing. The main difference is how you consume international literature and how probably you deal with some prominent visitors that probably they just go to the capital. And we were talking about, for example, La Azotea de Reina, that it was a very well-known place. La Azotea is the rooftop of Reina. Reina Maria Rodriguez is a Cuban poet, very well-known with a lot of works. So she was the host of that, tertulia or peña or gathering, and she received a lot of international visitors. So in that sense, they have more opportunities to develop and even to create some kind of collaborations or publishing international, magazines or editorials, publishing house and stuff like that. That opportunities in the countryside are less, and that's the reason in the countryside there is more prolific the way of the independent publishing house, and people that come from these regions are also in charge of most of the independent editorial house outside the country. That is also very interesting because they don't believe in anything. They don't think they have chances to publish their works, and they are, creating the channel to do that. But I think, there are really good writers in the Cuban provinces also. I hope there are differences because when you live in the capital, and Havana is still, even inside all these, despite all these problems, is still a really active and culturally active capital. They have some other, influences probably and things that they want to achieve, but in the province there are a lot of good poets and writers of fiction, short fiction, and yeah, I think Cuba is in general a very cultural nation of writers and poets, and we actually have some jokes about this because it's funny. Right. Well, that's another point. Yeah, I understand now what you say. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but it should be. If you are more visible, and if you are, but the thing is that no, what is happening is so all the way around. Poets in the provinces, they are sometimes more attacked and more they are more. Some kind of political reaction against poets in the provinces that actually in Havana, in Havana it happens too, but in the provinces the situation is more worse. Is in terms, I don't know, because maybe the level of repression in the whole country is the same. So in the province, in the Havana, capital that is very populous, you have a lot of people. So even when you have more repression, probably it's not the same. In the province, maybe you are one of the 2 or 3 most important poets. Whatever you say, everybody's checking on you. So, yeah.
There is an example in the movie Santa Andres that is talking about one of these poets that is, the case.
Yeah, the Film Prat.
Yeah.
Yeah, for example, there are a lot of people that have been silenced in the province. And when you live in the province, if you don't exist, you don't exist anymore. you know, because you live in the countryside. Even in, you know, if you live in Havana, maybe you have a chance that some prominent visitors go to your house or propose you something. But if you live in the countryside and they silence you, you become a no person. So it's hard. Now we are living in that situation with several, you know, poets in Holguín and some other, you know, provinces in Cuba. But you're right. I mean, we have also, you know, like what happened in the 80s with some writers that were, you know, really repressed in Havana. But that happened in the whole country. I mean, the beauty of all this criminal mind is that the way they are repressed in the country, the same way happening everywhere. It's not concentrated in the capital. It's not concentrated in a province. You cannot say that that's one person that is bad enough or that is an ugly person that wants to do that. It's general. That system is applied in every single city, even the smallest, you know. So if you live in let's say a town of 200 people and you are the poet there, they will have somebody to repress you. So yeah, it's crazy, but that's the way it is.
Although with the internet now, sometimes it's better because you can send your poetry to people in Havana.
They don't polish you, but you polish your poetry outside the country. And people read you in newspaper or digital newspaper or magazine, and you know.
There is another case that we're going to bring later also in August. It's called Omni Zona Franca. And Omni Zona Franca is a group of poets writers who live in this area called Alamar, which was an area built for workers, designed after Soviet designs for workers' house. And they were using the Casa de la Cultura, which is kind of a local cultural institution, cultural center, to do their stuff. And they achieved a lot of freedom in the 90s and so on. But then at some point, that was cut, you know.
And those cultural centers are actually run by the state. That happened, and people are creating. They get on board of, you know, the institution. They try to do their work there. They try to do a very contribute to the society. Do their free, you know, they are free and that kind of stuff. At some point, the institution say, or somebody from the, you know, like a Stasi or something here in Germany, people from the security of the state, they go there and say, well, I don't think this is good here. You don't should be promoting that kind of stuff because you are creating some kind of problem. It's the other way around. That institution is channelizing people, the creativity of people that maybe they are unconformed, but they are not opposing the government. They are basically trying to be free. Then they become oppositors. Crazy, but that's the way it happened. That's Cuba.
And sometimes the work is not saying anything against the government. It's just the fact that young people are together in one space feeling free. So that's what they are really cutting. It's not sometimes the poetry that is written or the painting that is being painted. It's just the fact that people are feeling too free. And then what happened, they have to leave this institution many times in a violent way, like the police come and take them out of there, and then they go to the houses and they start doing it from the houses, you know, like happened with them actually. Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just so interested. I'm working in Dresden at university, and yeah, I'm teaching art there, art history also from Latin America. This is why I'm so interested also. And we had just an exhibition at the SKD, Staatliche Kunstsammlung Dresden, about the art in GDR times, and there were so many Cuban posters, incredible quality, incredible Cuban solidarity posters. And I'm wondering, now I'm going to Cuba in September, and I'm wondering what is expecting me there. Can you talk a little bit about the archives? Yeah, just see it from your space. The archives, I mean, how can people work with the art in Cuba? Is it only in Havana concentrated like in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, or is it, what can people work with their own heritage, let's say?
Well, I think I want to see this exhibition you're talking about. It will be very nice to see it. ¿Dónde está?
Next year.
Next year in October. In Dresden, okay. No, I think the thing that was kind of beautiful at the beginning of the revolution in Cuba is like enthusiasm and hope was together with the building of a new society. And that, of course, and revolution always inspire artists. Artists love revolutions and, you know, like big changes. Yeah, exactly, because revolutionary romances, as you said. And what is more artistic than a revolution, no? But I think over the time, this changed. A lot of, in 62 already, which is very, 59 is the revolution, and already 3 years later, Fidel Castro speak to the writers and the filmmakers and all the artists to make sure that they understand that they cannot go into against the revolution, but also that the revolution had a role that was very clear for the state and the regime was a propaganda tool, basically. He said in different words and like 3 hours of speech, but basically that's a resume.
He say inside the revolution, everything. Outside the revolution, nothing.
Actually,
Right.
The actual words are inside the revolution, everything, outside the revolution, no rights, ningún derecho. And I think that's very important because it is the law that was used against artists. And the censorship is in Cuba not only a matter of taste, of moral, it's a matter of law, you know, and you can go. And right now we have 2 artists, Manuel Otero Alcántaro and Michael Osorbo, who are in prison for 5 and 9 years just for doing their art. So this is not just, oh, I don't like it, or morally I will be offended. No, it has always from the beginning been a legal matter. So, so then what happened, I think, is that over time, the distance between the faith in the revolution and the happiness and the, you know, hope that come with excitement for artists who are dreaming kind of drift apart. And I think then you start having the 70s and so on, art that is more like following. You have a series of artists who were basically, some of them believed, but most of them were not believers. They were just people who wanted to survive and were doing this kind of odes to the revolution that you can even see in the aesthetic treatment. They were not sincere anymore. You know, they were just either survival tour or a cynical attitude, you know. And the more time passed, the more this goes. And also another group of people start doing something different in opposition with that. Not in opposition, but as an alternative discourse. And this is what the state in Cuba, the actual regime has tried to obliviate and erase and, you know, and make it, and criminalize all these artists. So if you're doing that, you will never, like, for example, I had a conversation with someone that was being like helping us with the theater section, and that person was saying, no, these people are mediocres. The only reason is because they are independent. And who can say something is mediocre or not? The form is something that sometimes needs time to be digested and understood. Art form, you know? And also, what is mediocre? Is it the regulated aesthetics, the one that is correct? I don't know. And experimental is not correct. So I think many times the judgment in Cuba for discredit this kind of work is not political, it's aesthetic. So what they say is not a good artist or something like that, because what they don't want is to talk about the subject in the work, the same way they do with people in the street who protest, and they are never, never, ever condemned for political reasons. Like, officially, there is no political prisoners in Cuba. And you have right now 1,400 people in prison because they went out in the street July 11 to say, I want freedom and I'm not afraid anymore, and leave. So that's political. That's not disturbance of public space, as they call it. So I think there is always this process. It has been a game for a long time where people are doing something and they are evaluated as something else. And so it's this kind of tiring, cyclical situation. And I think artists say, basta, no? It's like a while ago. Also, it's boring. It's a boring game. It's not that smart anymore. Yeah. You have another question? Hmm? Well, thank you so much for coming. And we invite you to see the exhibition. It's going to be here for 10 days. We have a bunch of people coming during these 10 days. We're going to release new No Country magazine, which is a collaboration between Rialta and El Estornudo. They did a special issue. Hypermedia magazine did a special issue, and Mujercito, all of them are going to be released here. Plus, we have conversation with many of the people who are running these independent publishing houses.
The first of these magazines is bilingual, English and Spanish. So, people that can read English can also, have this, and there are a lot of good content, and it's really a huge. We will be presenting that on Friday. So if you are in the area, stay in tune and come here. It will be our pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, they can be purchased here and online. Yeah, but here they brought like 20 boxes of book or something, so we have enough. Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and see.